Hey everyone, good evening. Thank you for being here, for joining us to celebrate Reverend Dr. Anna Piela and Reverend Dr. Michael Woolf's new book, Confronting Islamophobia in the Church, Liturgical Tools for Justice. My name is Ez, and I'm both an ordinand here at Hyde Park Union Church, as well as a bookseller at the Seminary Co-op down the street, an independent and unionized bookstore just on Woodlawn. So we're so thrilled to be joined by the authors, as well as Imam Tariq El-Amin for such, I think, a generative and much needed discussion. And if you're reading this book along with our Theology and Justice reading group, or you'd like to purchase a copy, they're available. See me in the back after the event, and you can also get your book signed by Michael and Anna tonight as well. So there will be time at the end for audience questions. When it comes to that time, just raise your hand like it's class, and I'll pass you the microphone. We've also invited the authors to return for a talk back on March 8th in the evening, so mark your calendars and also keep an eye out for more details on that. And without further ado, allow me to formally introduce our guests. Our authors, Anna Piela and Michael Woolf, are a married clergy couple who co-founded Challenging Islamophobia Together Chicagoland, an interfaith solidarity initiative dedicated to confronting anti-Muslim hate. Both ordained American Baptist pastors, they are deeply rooted in the Christian tradition, yet believe that learning from other religions enriches and deepens their own faith. Together, they serve as co-associate regional ministers for the American Baptist Churches of Metro Chicago, which is a denomination of this church. Anna is also a senior writer with the American Baptist Home Mission Societies, and Michael serves as senior minister of Lake Street Church, Chicago of Evanston. Equal parts pastor, activist, and theologian, they bring faith to life through public witness and interreligious collaboration. And our interlocutor is Imam Tariq El-Amin. He is the resident Imam of Masjid Al-Taqwa in Chicago, host of the American Muslim podcast and the Sanitizing History podcast, as well as the founder of the Chicago Black Muslim History Tour. His work explores the intersections of faith, culture, and storytelling, using satire and reflection to challenge dominant narratives and reclaim buried truths. A bridge builder in interfaith spaces, his work is grounded in deep commitment to human dignity, and his new book, Sanitizing History, a children's book for adults because real history was way too uncomfortable, was published last year in October. Let's give him a hand, folks.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. It is great to be able to share space with you all, Anna and Michael, to talk about your book, to get a sense of what you hope to achieve, although the title is very forthright, right? Confronting Islamophobia in the Church, Liturgical Tools for Justice. Can you first tell us, whoever wants to jump in first, and say, what was the impetus for this book?
Sure. I mean, I think that we started thinking about that we wanted to do the book really, I think post-October 7th, we noticed a lot of the Christian community started taking steps back from the Muslim communities, and we started also hearing our Muslim friends and neighbors sort of saying, why did we invest so much time in these interfaith relationships if they were just going to evaporate when the going sort of got tough? And I think in the interfaith world we saw, after that event, I think we really saw Christians feeling like they had to take sides in some way, where they had to pick between Jews and Muslims, and what we wanted to do is kind of say, how can we build bridges? And so that's, Anna and I started Challenging Islamophobia Together Chicagoland to try to build some of those bridges and to redo some of that network. And we also started thinking, well, how can we bring some of what we've learned over many years of this kind of work, how can we give that to other people so that they can perhaps use it to build bridges themselves in other communities and in different ways. But I think, the genocide in Gaza and everything has really done a lot of damage to the interfaith community locally here too. And so I think that there's a lot of repair that has to happen. And hopefully this book is, in some ways, a little bit of that repair.
Yeah, which is not to say that we sort of want to smooth over Gaza. It is a very important issue for us, and we talk about it in our book. And this is not something that we're trying to sort of push aside in order to create superficial interfaith relationships. It is definitely central to our endeavor.
When you think about what it means to center your own faith tradition, I'll say that again for Mike. When you think about what it means to center your own faith tradition and those that you provide spiritual care or guidance to, when you think about extending that into bridge building, what are some of the specific tools that you offer those your fellow Christians where they are able to reconcile their own faith identity and also enter into this bridge building space?
So in the book itself, I think what's really useful is that, our publisher requested this, but we have a number of questions after each chapter that are actually, forcing some reflection, specifically about how what the reader has just read colors their understanding of their faith and, their faith's kind of history. So we're hoping that these questions after each chapter can be used at, book studies at churches, which happens with a lot of regularity. We've got Lent coming up, so there will be Lenten studies. There is a lot of sort of adult education going on in churches, and that's where we're sort of, aiming for.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the book is trying to do is to help Christians also sort of just directly engage with their tradition in a deeper way. So what I think a lot of people do if they're not super experienced with interfaith work, is they somehow feel that learning about another tradition can be very threatening. It's going to in some way lessen their faith or perhaps attract them to a different faith. But what we've found in our lives and what I think a lot of people have found is that comparison actually drives you deeper into your own faith to sort of wrestle with core questions and to do a little bit of that comparative work. It can really yield a lot of fruit for Christians who want to dive deeper into their faith. Max Muller has this quote that I trot out and I think a lot about all the time. It's this idea that the person who knows one religion knows none. And so if we know more about other religions, if we are involved in that conversation, through that dialogue, we can actually become much better sort of interlocutors for that conversation, but also just better practitioners of our own faith.
So when you think about, Anna, your mention of having these points of reflection at the end of the chapters, and the different ways that the book can be utilized, would you say that it is best used in group settings from like a pedagogical standpoint, where the reader is able to engage with other readers at the same time, or from a maybe if we talk about like an autodidactic type of a?
I mean, we hope that the book is versatile. We hope the book is versatile enough to serve its purpose both for individual study, and I confess we are really hopeful that specifically Christian clergy pick up the book and sort of engage with it, but it is also appropriate for laity. So sort of engaged lay people who are sort of who are invested in the discipleship, the issue of discipleship in the church. But I think in groups, at least in my experience, in groups, when a conversation gets going, I think the conversation generally gets richer because you hear other people's reflections and other people's questions. So, but like I said, I think it's pretty versatile.
It's definitely versatile, but one of the things, I think we're switching to this. Okay. So one of the things that we are really hopeful about is that people who read this actually get some concrete ways that they can have those conversations with others. So I think that it's fine for a person, an individual, to read the book, and they'll get a lot out of it. But the real hope is that there's practical ways to move that conversation to a smaller group, or if you're planning worship in any capacity, there's really concrete and useful tools for like Christian leaders to be able to incorporate these sort of learnings and dialogues and scriptural sort of comparisons in Scripture. That's one of probably the innovations that we did. I spent a lot of my ministry hoping and saying, wow, I wish there was an interfaith lectionary, the lectionary being the sort of the set of readings that are assigned in churches every week. And I really wish that there was something that was easily accessible where I could have comparisons between these different readings, and it just didn't exist. And so in this way, 2 of the chapters are those sort of lectionary commentaries where you can have that conversation really clearly laid out, and it's sort of the resource that I think we wanted or at least I definitely wanted when I was a pastor trying to do more of that interfaith work. So I think that it responds to that need. That's a really practical need.
That's awesome. So there's basically kind of this comparative, I wouldn't say a comparative, but a complementary religious education that takes place as well, from a thematic standpoint. Now, you mentioned that you're hoping to provide tools, right, to folks that they can go, well, particularly Christian clergy, right? Is there a particular order that those tools need to be utilized, or is it kind of an a la carte presentation where they can say, okay, I can just go into the toolbox based on the setting and utilize?
I think it's the latter, in the sense that not every lectionary reading will invite that conversation, but there are ones that definitely do. Like in Advent, there's the story of birth of Jesus, and the Muslim story, the Islamic story of the birth of Jesus and the story of Mary is beautiful and gives a very different perspective. So I've heard about some examples of sort of Muslim visitors coming and reading the Islamic story of Mary in a Christian church, and that happened like literally in 2-3 churches. I've seen that in the news, and I think that's just a great idea. But we don't have to limit ourselves to just the Advent. There are many others, and it's not just it's not just about the figures, but we also have themes related to practices. So things like prayer or fasting, which are the five pillars for Sunni Muslims, 5 pillars of Islam. We're sort of trying to show the links between the foundations, the moral and ethical foundations that underpin those pillars, and what in a kind of language that would be intelligible to a Christian.
Michael, you mentioned something that I wanted to laugh a little bit, but and it was, I would say this may exist more among laity, and that is the idea that if I know more about another religion, then I run the risk of I look up, oh my God, I'm Muslim all of a sudden, or I'm Christian. How important is reconciling that worry, and maybe it's an unspoken worry, right? But how important is addressing that educative aspect of identity as a means of getting people to this point where they can they can also see themselves as active participants in pushing back against Islamophobia and all other forms of
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, I think that that is a big worry that a lot of people have, and whether it's spoken or not, it's always sort of in the room. So we try to tackle that pretty head on in the book and try to say, this is not about conversion. We're being made better Christians, and we invite you to be made a better Christian. And we invite you to think about your duty and how you respond to religious others, including Muslims, through a Christian lens. And so how are you going to practice your faith ethically? I think that worry for people is also kind of says a lot about how they think about God. So I think that it's a challenge in churches, sort of, what are we teaching people about God? Are we presenting models of God that present sort of God more a jealous lover who doesn't really want you to learn or know about any other sort of system? Or are we, again, presenting models of God that where God delights in diversity, which obviously must be true in the world? There wouldn't be this many languages, there wouldn't be this many races, there wouldn't be this many cultures, there wouldn't be this many religions unless God in some way delighted in that. So I think that it's also a theological challenge. How do we get people to appreciate, that God must delight in this diversity too, and you're also welcome to delight in it. In fact, you're supposed to. So there's a theological lens, and then there's the practical lens, and we try to do a little bit of both, I think, in the book.
Anything? Oh.
I just wanted to add one thing, and it's perhaps not something that everybody would apply themselves to, but for those who are more careful students of theology, we also have this argument that it is possible that through studying theological works from the Islamic perspective, including the critiques of Christian doctrine, there are lots of starting from the Middle Ages, critiques specifically of the Trinity and of divinity of Jesus, and that. And we're not saying that this should basically make you Muslim, no, but it actually can help a student of theology articulate their own understanding, their own Christian understanding of these concepts better. Because if you're aware of the critiques, then you can sort of respond to them and basically crystallize your own thoughts. And so one example that we always give is the example of the Trinity, which a lot of theological students, they don't feel that comfortable explaining, especially to outsiders, even after completing seminary. And they, it's either just a mystery, or they kind of go into very, very sort of deeply into Christian jargon that is not intelligible to others. And so, actually, reading about those critiques of the Trinity can help you understand for yourself, and that's not just our observation. That is something that we've read about in interfaith theological literature. Specifically, there is a professor at the Hartford International Seminary, David Grafton. He wrote about that. So, but that's for those who are sort of into theology, into sort of deep reflection.
That's a wonderful point to consider. When you think about, and what excites me about just the title, itself, what excites me is the potential for social transformation. And when I think about like Martin Luther, he spurred a revolution in terms of literacy, right? Being able to make the text accessible to the public, taking it from Latin and saying, okay, look, we don't speak Latin. These people, so we need to get it into the language of the people. So there's a revolution of literacy that takes place. We think about the civil rights movement. We think about how that was undergirded by faith. The church had was an animating force behind that in terms of social justice. What do you envision, or have you thought about what it means to reconcile this one of the larger representations of division that we have in our society today, and what that could possibly mean for our society and transformation in our time?
So do you mean Islamophobia in itself, or the intersections?
I would say the intersections, but also Islamophobia really almost as a placeholder, right? Because to knock that down would also, I think the logical conclusion would be that, we can like knock everything down. It is to say knock down anti-blackness and knock, what I mean? If that's clear.
Yeah, we say in our book, Islamophobia has very strong links with anti-black racism, specifically because on this continent and in the United States, Islamophobia sort of manifested itself also through slavery and anti-black racism, because the first Muslims who came to this continent were enslaved Africans. I think about 900,000 of all the Africans who were kidnapped were Muslim. And so this faith has had such a long tradition here. And that tradition is not always, it has been silenced, I think, for a very long time. The focus was on Muslims, maybe experiences of Arab Muslims and South Asian Muslims. And so when we hear today, when the politicians, American conservative politicians say, oh, expel all the Muslims from this country, I always think, are you also thinking about the African American Muslims? Because where are you going to expel them? First you kidnap them from, white people kidnap Africans from Africa, and then what? Do you expect them to just go back? They don't even know which country or which region of Africa So Islamophobia and anti-black racism are bedfellows, and we could, if you think about it, white Christian nationalism is another sort of plane of analysis and of human activity that sort of goes together. So I think sometimes, when we're thinking we're fighting just one or confronting just one, very often I think we're sort of, by extension, by proxy, we're also addressing the other things. And so you couldn't really write about the history of Islamophobia in America without addressing transatlantic slavery. And you asked about sort of the vision of what could happen.
He said, leave me some.
Okay. So I want to make a pitch for like why this is important. I think that for a long time we've been hearing that religion in the West is in decline, and certainly if those amongst us who are Christians are probably in churches that have had their peak sometime in the past, and perhaps are thinking maybe another peak is not going to come, or if it comes, we don't know how it would. So the decline has been sort of baked in, at least let's just say to Christianity in the West. And so that can be a little dispiriting. But one of the things that we really trace, and we did some studies of some American Baptist clergy, and we did all this kind of work to really trace, is to say that people are learning and they're being shaped and formed in really intense ways by congregations. Most of the time people are learning about other religions in, let's just say, less elegant or perhaps negative or not the greatest ways in the world. But what that means is that congregations and religious communities still have such power to be able to form people and to shape how they approach the world and to shape their imagination. That to me gives me a lot of hope. If we could just change how that engine is being used, and we could use it to fight things like Islamophobia, we could use it to have honest conversations about racism, we could use it to call out stuff like white Christian nationalism. If we could take all these things and turn churches their sort of innate power to form people, I think it could be really good for building a pluralistic democracy in this country, which is increasingly under threat. I mean, if you look at white Christian nationalism, J.D. Vance in December said that this is a Christian nation, always has been and always will be. And of course, that it completely ignores history in some profound ways, and completely ignores what this country was founded. But that's the vision that's being put forward. It's a very dangerous vision. It kills. And so I think that we really have to buttress the ideas about pluralistic democracy in this country. And one of the ways that we do is to activate these thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of little community centers where people go on Sundays and learn. And I think that if we can do that, then it really could be great for society.
How important is it to you when we think about a message that's being promoted, an idea? Sometimes an idea is accepted or rejected just based on who the interlocutor is, right? Who the person is that presents it. How important is it for you as, what's the word I use, as white presenting clergy to make this particular argument at this time? And do you anticipate that there is more or less, how do you see acceptance of that based on your own presenting identities?
I will say this. I think what we're saying and the ideas we're presenting, I think they're causing panic among the Islamophobes, the white Christian nationalists, or the prejudice. Let's put it that way. Because this is a bigger panic than because we're white clergy or that we're clergy, rather than if we were scholars or if we were Muslims. Because I assume that they're thinking that these are the groups that they're kind of bound to. Whereas I think perhaps they see clergy people as a kind of bastion of privilege. And so the fact that we were interviewed by Imam Malik on Muslim Network TV, and I think I said something in the interview. That I said Islamophobia is in the air we breathe, and that caused fury. There was this article in the Middle East Forum that was trying to take us down, and I think that was partly because, or mainly because we are white clergy, because we're the fifth column among the people that they think are their kind of electorate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously our identities in some ways are going to be make us more heard with some groups and less heard with other groups, and that's obviously true. But we really feel like it's really important to use our privilege and to use it in really concrete ways to speak to the communities where we have power and influence, and to try to shape those for justice. And that feels really important, I think, right now with where this country is. Not to sort of sit this one out or sort of or to, I don't know, hide our light under a bushel, for a Christian term, or whatever we want to say. It feels really important to really get in the fray and to see what we can do to, again, how can we build this pluralistic democracy? How can we perhaps save the soul of this country? Or whatever we can do, we want to do it.
We don't. I guess it is spoken about in some areas, but we don't often, I think, have enough public conversations about the impact of capitalism on religion, particularly religious institutions, and how, as predominantly these are all 501c3 organizations, and they depend upon the generosity of congregants. Do you consider that structure and this religious marketplace that exists that would maybe be an impediment to kind of opening up the doors of dialogue and getting congregants to see beyond their own identity without fear that our bottom line will suffer?
Yeah, I think some of the responses in our survey expressed that very fear, that the congregation may not like being educated about Islam. And of course, if they don't like, they will vote with their feet, and they will go somewhere, where they don't have to engage in this kind of conversation. But I think this coin has two sides. I think churches that are open to interfaith dialogue stand the chance of attracting people who were put off from other churches just because of that reason. And I think just today I saw a comment on Michael's social media that it was in response to some of his posts, but the woman who said, I started hating church and I left church because one of the deacons in my church said something hateful about Muslims. And then Michael said, well, then come to my church. We've got Zoom church every Sunday. And she said, yes, I will consider it. And so I think, some people will float away, but some people will be attracted.
This is my favorite topic. I'm going to try only to speak for perhaps 30 to 60 seconds. I think that one of the big problems that we have in the church today is the professionalization of the ministry, and the fact that, for instance, I lead a church and it's my primary source of income, and I have to, and the fact that all of that is bound up together, and and the fact that churches are in decline, there's less money available and everything, the atmosphere is very much less risk-taking, more insular looking. Let's safeguard this institution. Let's build what I call like fortress church. And I think that is not necessarily, that is not where God is supposed to be leading us, but that's certainly where fear can lead us. And that's the natural place that fear leads us. So there's a reason why in Scripture there's so many admonitions to not be afraid, is because fear is a natural part of being human. But religion's supposed to help us in some way to move beyond that. But I think that for a lot of pastors, if the money goes down or if there's an unpopular thing that they're doing, then they start to think, well, if I lose my job, then I lose my money too. So it really kind of can make the prophetic role of pastors sort of a little bit less accentuated, and they become sort of spiritual bureaucrats, which is not necessarily what they're supposed to be doing.
Just to add one thing is that we're connected to Lake Church of Evanston, and I think not every church would allow their pastors to do it. I think it's a very specific place. It's kind of an outlier if you look at American Christianity in general. So we are in a way in a privileged position because Michael can, as their senior minister, he can do all kinds of radical work, and his congregants cheer on him rather than punish him. But that will not be the case with everybody.
You mentioned earlier about Gaza and the genocide and how that has been a kind of a real touch point that exhibits the fragility of interfaith relationships. What people profess, in public, once it's time to actually, prove that, it becomes a matter of, well, this is something I was able to profess out of convenience. How important is it, and in your estimation, what steps need to take place to reconcile well, we'll just start with Gaza, right? I mean, because in 2020 it was George Floyd. But how do we reconcile these things so that we can get to the point of having discussions about interfaith education that leads to this kind of transformative activism?
That is a big question.
Yeah, I think that's $1 million question, right? So one of the things that I think we've all done in interfaith spaces is we've done falafel interfaith. We've gone and we've eaten falafel with people and never talked about anything that could be remotely controversial in any way. So I think a lot of people who have been doing interfaith work have gone to those sorts of events. And those are useful for building relationships. Falafel interfaith has its place. You probably need to eat falafel with people for a while and build those relationships, but that's not the end. That's the beginning, right? So the more middle and end parts of that relationship are supposed to be a willingness to talk about tough issues. I can't think of a tougher issue right now in interfaith relations than Gaza. And it's been true for years, but I think that what we have to do is number one, I think that there's trainings that can be done for how to stay in tough conversations. I think people need to take advantage of that. But number two, the thing that I often end up wondering is, what is the point of building sort of these interfaith relationships if, when it comes to something like a genocide, we can't even name that and we can't even talk about it? So there has to be room to be able to name reality, or at least to be able to listen to someone's perception of reality if you don't think that that's the reality, right? And not sort of leave the room when that happens. And so right now we've got a lot of people, I think, that if they hear any sort of testimony about that, if they hear a perspective, they'll just leave the room. And so like I was at the Abrahamic dinner down at Islamic Foundation in Villa Park, and I talked, and we all talked about all sorts of different stuff, but at some point Gaza came up, and several people at the interfaith dinner didn't finish their dinner, they just got up and walked out. Right? So that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. I think we have to do some sort of reset, and we have to do some calling in for folks to say, this relationship that we've been sort of building for 20 or 30 years, surely it means we can stay in a tough conversation, right? And so I think that's part of that is about building on those relationships, but saying that it can't just be we're going to eat falafel and never talk about anything controversial. Otherwise, what's the point?
Let's go back to the way you've laid this book out. So it is thematic, correct?
The liturgical part is, but the first few chapters, well, there's a Islam primer. So just the basics, the real bare bone basics, for people who may not have heard about how Islam came to be. There are a lot of them in America. There are a lot of them in the world. But that is the sort of intro. And then we talk about the historical roots of Islamophobia in Christianity. Because actually, if you look at history, Islamophobia is a very old, the word itself, anti-Muslim prejudice maybe is kind of another contender. But the word Islamophobia is only 100 years old. But the sentiments that kind of it represents are as old as Islam, because as soon as Islam came on the scene, there were polemics from Christian monks, Christian writers, who were, at first treating Islam as a Christian heresy, as something that, is just sort of a weird version of Christianity with an added prophet. And then, around the times of the Crusades, there had to be like a reframing, and so Muslims and the Arab lands of at the time they were framed as a kind of an existential threat, and it was sanctioned right from the top. So the Pope Urban II gave a very famous speech in which he names Muslims as the accursed race, and he encourages the Crusaders to take over Jerusalem because that land is theirs. So from the Promised Land, it kind of transformed to the Holy Land that has to be defended from the infidels, from the non-believers, and so that kind of frame has been with us for almost 1,000 years, and we can see it even today. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, so I just want to add, like, anybody who's on social media, maybe the algorithm knows that I like religion a lot, but there is a lot of Crusades content on Instagram, on TikTok. There's a big research. I mean, our defense secretary right now has a giant Deus Vult tattoo with a Crusaders cross and everything. So, like, crusading content, I think especially for young right-wing men, is extremely big right now. I mean, it's huge. So I think that what is old is new again. And I think that the discourse that we're talking about that can be 1,000 years old is in Randy Fine's mouth. The congressperson who's constantly saying Islamophobic stuff. These tropes, they never died. They are just getting recycled. And so that's why I think in the book we sort of try to pay a little attention to the history and how they're coming back.
Yeah, but we also talk about the intersections with anti-black racism, with Palestine, and also then Christian nationalism here, American context, and then we provide some findings from our survey of the American Baptist clergy. That we ask them a lot of questions about how they understand Islam, how much do they know about it, how much do they engage with it, and then we've got those resource-based chapters. So, yeah.
So we really could continue what you just said. I want to say this in 30 seconds really quick before we move into this next portion. That point about the Crusades, being able to make the connection between the Crusades, colonialism, and the corporate foundings of the United States of America, and anti-black racism and Islam, well, I would say anti-Muslim bias. There were over 250 rebellions, slave rebellions, and the great majority of them were either led or supported by Muslims. So there's this rebellious, this fight the power sort of spirit that has existed in the presentation of Islam here in this nation, and of course in abroad. But man, you guys are good. Please, let's give them a round of applause.
asked him the question earlier to the degree of what would need to happen for the reconciliation or repair around what's happened in Gaza. And I'd be curious to hear your answer to that question.
Me? Yes. Oh, okay. So the question is, previous question that was asked, what would need to happen for us to have some level of reconciliation or repair around Gaza as it relates to interfaith relationships, right? I think leaning into our common human identity and respecting and realizing that what we're all looking for is justice, is mercy. It's to promote human dignity. And if that is the baseline, irrespective of faith tradition, then we can do anything. We have solid coalition, we have solid relationships. So I think that's something that has to happen across the board. And the interest and commitment to that, we just have to see, Yeah, so maybe it's more of a pipe dream, but I believe it's attainable.
Pipe dreams are our specialty.
Yeah.
So you're in good company.
Yeah. Did you all want to speak to that again? Okay. All right. All right. Next question. I hope that was. So I want to repeat the question, and I want to kind of sum that. The question is, how do we establish or build what you refer to as kind of a triangular relationship amongst the Abrahamic faiths that don't result in the two against one, right? One part of that being excluded.
So I think there's sort of big national level interfaith dialogues, which I think are their own thing, but I think about more local stuff, and so I find a lot of times the Muslim communities are, for whatever reason, sort of excluded from these sort of local clergy groups that are happening. And so one of the things that seems apparent to me is if we wanted to have a real triangle, is that it would have to actually be inclusion. And oftentimes these clergy groups, because Christians and Jews both have a lot of professional clergy who can meet we can meet at 10 a.m. and we can do this, and there's not exactly an attempt or a desire to reach out or to have other faiths represented. So I think that a lot of it is sort of expanding the table and making sure everyone can have a seat at it, and sort of basic inclusion would go a long way. I honestly think that there's a lot of perspectives that could be at that table, that could be being shared, that could help sort of fill that out, that aren't present in a lot of conversations, and that's to everyone's detriment. So I think that that's one thing that could happen that would be a really good idea.
Yeah, the best example of a triangular interfaith relationship I've seen in the last years were the student encampments at Northwestern. We went to visit them one time, and there were students of different faiths praying, side by side, from their own from perspective of their own traditions, and their coexistence was something beautiful to behold. So, and so I could say that our hope lies in young people who, sort of are not weighed down with more materialistic considerations. And also research shows that generally young people are bound to skew more progressive than older people. So, maybe the hope is in them.
But I also think that that's exactly why the Trump administration has prosecuted so many people and has tried to really punish people from those encampments too. I mean, I think that that's the sort of grassroots stuff that perhaps could produce the kind of change we want to see in the world, but there are active forces who want to stifle that and want to make sure that doesn't really come into being.
I would add to that, it's important to understand historically and from a contemporary sense that religion has always been a proxy for a political power, for the power to shape culture. And there's a saying, the devil's in the details, but the devil's in the dollar. And when you understand the impact of materialism, I'm so happy you said that. So the impact of materialism on faith, interfaith relationships and identity, I would say until there's a commitment to, which one is it? Is this verse hangs in Harvard's law school, the 135th verse of the 4th surah or chapter of the Quran. And it says, "O you believe, stand firmly for justice as witnesses to God, even as against yourselves," right? Being willing to put yourself out there first. It actually allows us to move beyond the triangular and into the circular, right, where we are able to bring everyone in. But I think until we are able to make the separation and recognize the impact of materialism, of capitalism on our faith identities and engagements, then we won't be doing it properly. Because I think that's one of the biggest things that stifles that relationship. Yes.
Thank you for your talk and your moderation. I kind of have two parts to my question. First, or I'll just sort of express that I feel like as a Muslim, I've grown like really weary and tired of interfaith rhetoric and programming over the course of my life, in part because of how shallow it's tended to be and how we can't, or talk about things like honestly, Palestine has probably always been the biggest issue, the biggest wedge that has made interfaith work feel shallow, because you can't broach that subject, because if you do, the whole project falls apart. That being said, also since October 7th, as a part of the Muslim community, I feel distanced from that community too. And I think our two reverends might agree that, like, my faith community has changed to being the people on the ground, the people I'm organizing with, people of different faiths, no faith, queer, trans, atheist, whatever. Like, I feel more kinship and affinity with those people than I do with the average person, even at my house. And so it's like a total shift in how I'm thinking about faith. And part of me is like, screw all this interfaith stuff. Like, you gave the example of the story of people walking away when you bring up Palestine. My first thought was, let them go. We don't but then I'm like, okay, you've written a book for the church, you're in the church, you have this work to do. And then I remember, oh no, we do have white Christian nationalists that need to be worked on, right? That we need to move, and hopefully you're doing that work. And I see you moving interfaith conversations into a more real and truthful and honest direction, which I appreciate. And so I guess getting to the question, but you can comment on any of that, is how do you get it to the people that need it most? Because you're in a lefty, progressive Christian church, which is great. How do you get it to the people for whom what's going on in Palestine is part of like their eschatology, and to the people that are frankly doing and perpetuating the most harm? How do we get it out of just our bubble? And yeah, that's the second part to my question. The first part, I guess, has to do with like reconceptualizing faith communities on the ground as being more about like-footed rather than like-minded people.
Yeah, it's a heavy one because I wish we had a straightforward answer. We don't really interact in a sort of sustained and sort of constructive manner with Christian conservatives. What do you mean it's not true?
I mean, like, we're American Baptists, so like, I mean, part of the thing is like we're there. It's a big tradition. We occupy firmly in the big tent, the left tent pole for sure. But the goal is, we know that there are some conservative American Baptists reading this book that I've heard. That we have colleagues, and so we're hoping that at least in that world, because we are people in that tradition, at least there can be conservative American Baptists or moderate American Baptists for whom what's going on right now is part of their eschatology, 100%. I think that those are the networks that we're probably able to reach, but beyond the sort of American Baptist bubble, I'm not really sure. I mean, I think the group you were actually alluding to are not conservative American Baptists. I think you were alluding to people like Southern Baptists, with whom we don't. Conservative Southern Baptists are very close. Conservative American Baptists that I know are pretty close to Southern Baptists, at least in the eschatological thing. So we disagree, which is fine.
Yeah, but that was actually part of the rationale of us publishing this book with Judson Press, which is an American Baptist denominational press, and so. It is in itself very sort of, it's a progressive press if you look at their catalog. But in a way, American Baptists, whether conservative or progressive, they only have one denominational press. And so that is, I think, one channel we can reach at least that constituency. Huh?
Yeah, and Daisy Khan is probably going on a bus tour to actually talk to evangelicals and is going to use our book on that bus tour. So I think that could be really cool. And so maybe it will actually trickle into the sort of communities that you're talking about that need it the most. I also totally feel much more connected to, for instance, people at Broadview that I did organizing with than pretty much anybody else. So I'm totally there with you on the experiential thing about it. And if I care about interfaith work at all anymore, it's the fact that I think when we get together around shared values, we can fight ICE, we can fight authoritarianism, we can fight Islamophobia, we can do the sort of work, we can fight racism, we can actually do the work to put the world back together again. And I'm very interested in that work. I'm very interested in the multi-faith coalition to do it. But I'm not a big fan of. I will eat the falafel, but I don't want that to be like the whole raison d'etre of the experience. I'm much more interested in how are we going to figure out what we're going to do and how can interfaith relationships fight authoritarianism and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm just going to say Michael's position in our community is very interesting. When after October 7. There was somebody trying to organize a panel of 3 leaders, Jewish leader, Christian leader, and Muslim leaders to basically denounce the genocide. And they could not find a Christian. And that's how Michael, he got invited because someone had heard of him. And that actually was like a really good entry point for us to go into interfaith work. But he got a lot of flack from our local community. A rabbi called him screaming that he's supporting Hamas or something ridiculous like that. And so, and they kind of sort of came around, but they only interacted with Michael on the sort of pro-immigration work, anti-racist work. But our church, and there's a lot of like Palestine-related activity, and that's like just collectively ignored. It's very interesting how they kind of are able to just pigeonhole and pigeonhole different kinds of when it is one person and all these things matter together. You can't just like hide one away.
I'll offer this. Between 18, I think it was like 1870 or 1880 and 1940, there were about 5,000 black folks lynched in the United States of America, primarily in the South, but some did happen in places like Illinois, Missouri, and the major perpetrator of those events were white Christians. This was overlooked by presidential administrations, after administration from Roosevelt and Wilson and so on. I mentioned this to illustrate this. That's just one piece of some of the pain that has existed in our nation that went largely overlooked by communities professing faith. We now have a position where Gaza, and I would mention Sudan and the Congo as well, exist as stark reminders of the inhumanity, right? It's being taken away from them. The condition of African Americans, of black folks in America, it is what is referred to in the Quran. It says that oppression is worse than slaughter, because oppression over time becomes normalized. And the response that we would have had to it at the outset, we lose that sensitivity. The danger with Gaza, with Sudan, is that if we allow that to become normalized, we will have lost a major indicator of what it means for us to be human. So, and I will tell you, if you're tired of the falafel, come get you some bean soup. Try bean soup, interfaith. A little joke for y'all. I think the words get in the way. We have our faith traditions, and they're valuable. There's something valuable in them. But what we are trying to do is to assert our humanity, assert a responsibility, a shared responsibility that we have. So I would say we need to have more shared humanity meetings. Shared humanity. The basis of this meeting is to uphold our shared humanity. And if we recognize we have a responsibility of stewardship, right? In Islam, we refer to that as Khalifa, right? That's the caretaker, the steward, successive generations. It's a responsibility that doesn't exist with just one generation. It continues. If we accept this as a shared responsibility, if we accept that we have a common creator, a common destination, I think either we're going to say we're just on the devil's side outright, or we're going to have to reconcile the ways that we have been misshapen and allow ourselves to be reshaped by that commitment. But like I said, sometimes the words can get in the way. When faith itself can become an obstacle for engagement. Yes.
extent is it just kind of superficial, and to what extent is it perhaps being used as a figure to say, we do interfaith, but our congregation does interfaith, so it's a checkbox, and maybe get into like a local politician, or to the congregation and say, it becomes almost something actually transgressive against the whole notion.
So let me repeat that question. The first question was about the, I guess, the occurrence of anti-Muslim racism outside of white denominations or white churches, right? And then the next was basically what is the thought on the occurrence of performative, if you will, interfaith?
Right. So, I mean, so white Christian nationalism and anti-black racism, Islamophobia, they're kind of like a triad that's, in a lot of polls, they are correlated. And so, yeah, usually when you sort of deal with one, when you read about one, you can't really like not see the others. They're like really cozy bedfellows. But you asked about sort of like, did I get it correctly that you are sort of interested in like how Islamophobia sort of, how it was passed down?
I have some research on that.
ISPU.
Yeah, that's
right,
what.
The ISPU. Okay. Right, ISPU. Okay, yeah. So there's a poll. It's a very, very recent poll. It's called American Muslim Poll, done by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, and Imam Tariq is involved in a project with them. And that recent poll was really eye-opening because it has shown an incredible rise in sort of what they call the Islamophobia index for different Christian denominations. Of course, the white evangelicals were the top, but Roman Catholics were not far behind, and then generally for Protestants, it also rose. And so that sort of led us to ask that question, what's going on with Christians specifically. But white evangelicals, we talked with the researchers who work on the poll, and they told us that for the general Protestant group, it was the white evangelicals who drove it. So we see a sort of clear correlation between a particular ideology and politics and Islamophobia. But yeah, I don't know if you want to add.
The interesting part for me on that poll was something like Roman Catholicism, which is very racially diverse, showed a huge increase, which is quite alarming. And so we're talking about an 8-point increase amongst sort of Americans generally, but Roman Catholics were something like 11 points, 12 points. And I think white evangelicals were 14 points. This is in 2 years. This is since October 7th, really, is what we're talking about, right? So those are huge increases. So it also means that probably mainline Protestant, we're still trying to talk to the researcher, right, to figure out how they did the Protestant side, and Orthodox Christians were not included. It seems like probably mainline Protestant churches and black Protestants had less overall increases in Islamophobia than the general population. So it's varied. It's definitely varied. It is somewhat racialized, but it's something to consider that something like Roman Catholicism, the biggest sort of Christian tradition and the most racially diverse, had such sharp increases as well.
Yeah, and I would add, so that research, the most recent one by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, the lead researcher was Dr. Camila Movement-Oseguera, who conducted the Black Christian Views survey. And it was very enlightening, the amount of Islamophobia that existed amongst the black Christians. And a lot of that, what we found was that there was a high, they called high familiarity, but low knowledge. People could possibly identify a Muslim if they're visibly Muslim, but didn't know much about what the tenets of Islam. And I think there's something applicable in that study across the board, which was to talk about Christian hegemony and how that is often overlooked. And until it's named, and you see how it looks, in everyday life, you can't recognize that privilege. You're not able to actually use that privilege on behalf of those who don't have that same voice.
And your second point, I just want to briefly address. So I think that what I see a lot of is there are a lot of churches that have a relationship with the Jewish community, for instance, and that's an interfaith relationship that they have. And because they have that interfaith relationship, that's an interfaith relationship, so they do the interfaith thing, and so they're done. And so I think that part of what we're trying to do is to help people think a little bit more expansively about their interfaith relationships, and not just as a box to be checked, or not just as something that you want to do once a year, but is a real part of your being as a community. Thank you.
Would y'all join me in giving them a hand? Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being here. Before you go, please purchase a copy. They're at the back table, and make sure that you get it signed and also get home safe.